Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Denfair Speaker Space. I'm Sandra. I'm the editor of Denfair. And it was my pleasure to curate a speaker program this year, my first year with Denfair, especially because it gives me the platform to shine a light on stories that I really believe need to be discussed and shine a light on. Today we have a panel called Made in Asia. And obviously being Asian myself and being a design media professional, I have always wondered why there's a little bit of a discrepancy in the way that we understand design that comes out of Asia, and a bit of a maybe hierarchy of sorts that exists within the design industry that I think is important to unpack. With me today are a panel of people who can do exactly that. I have with me guest moderator Suzy Annetta, who's the editor of Design Anthology, and she's based in Hong Kong. Also based in Hong Kong is JJ Acuna, or Acuna? Acuna, who is a Filipino designer working all across Asia Pacific. I have Caroline from Reddie Furniture, based in Sydney with a manufacturing plant in Indonesia?
Indonesia, yeah.
Yes, correct. And John from One Design Office here in Melbourne. Each of these people bring a very different perspective to this topic, and I'm kind of really fascinated to hear all of their thoughts. I will warn you that this is a huge topic that we won't be able to put a neat little bow on within the hour that we have. And something very close, I think, to a lot of our hearts. And we feel like we're having an important discussion today. So if we could welcome the panelists today, let's give them a big round of applause. And over to you.
Thanks, Sandra. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Suzy Annetta, and I'm the editor-in-chief, but also the founder of Design Anthology magazine. And we're based in Hong Kong, but our editorial coverage is all across Asia, as well as Australia and New Zealand. And we made that decision deliberately because I'm from here, I'm from Melbourne originally, but I felt that it was important to acknowledge the fact that Australia and New Zealand are part of the Asia Pacific region. And we really wanted to kind of, I guess...
Surprise!
Yeah.
It's part of the Asia-Pacific region.
It is. We'll get to that. And we really wanted to kind of, I guess, embrace that sense of community. As Sandra said, this topic is obviously very dear to all of our hearts, and it is very dear to me, particularly because Asia has been my home for 17 years now. I've been in Hong Kong for 14 years, and I was in Tokyo for 3 years before that. And I think, like many Australians, I had the idea that I was going to end up in Europe, and that was always the end goal. Asia was a bit of an accident, and I'm really glad that that accident happened. And I think hopefully today, amongst a lot of things that we're probably going to be discussing, one of them will be hopefully the opportunities that lay on our doorstep. And that perhaps there are alternatives to only aspiring to working with or collaborating or even visiting Europe, as opposed to our neighbours right on our doorsteps. So I thought maybe we might start down the line with JJ for each of you guys to introduce yourselves and maybe talk a little bit about what it is that you do to give a bit of context to the conversation that we're about to have. So maybe JJ, if you want to give a start. JJ's the only non-Australian on the panel, so welcome to Melbourne.
Damn it. I love Australia so much. Well, my name is JJ. I was born in Manila. And I, because of political issues in the Philippines, our family immigrated to the United States, where I grew up in Texas. So I moved to the U.S. when I was 8, and the Philippines in the rearview mirror. The Philippines was in the rearview mirror. I mean, when you immigrate from Southeast Asia and move to the U.S., that's it. Everybody is expected to stay in the U.S. I went to school. I did architecture in upstate New York at Cornell, and then grad program in architecture at Columbia. And I went to Hong Kong for a 2-year internship. I did not expect to stay in Asia. I did not expect to stay in Hong Kong. I wanted to make it big in the United States. 15 years later, I'm still there practicing. I did corporate for 10 years in Hong Kong, rose to director level, and then quit corporate and started my own architectural concept and interior design studio about 4 or 5 years ago, designing restaurants, bars, cafes, lifestyle spaces, hospitality spaces, residential office spaces. And my office is based in Hong Kong and Manila, and our projects are in Hong Kong, Manila, Bangkok, Yangon, Taichung, soon Tokyo. So Asia professionally is the only thing I know. And I don't know anything else. So maybe we could expand about what the profession is like outside of Asia versus in Asia as well, because I'm here to learn as well.
Hi, I'm Caroline Olah. I am, I guess, Australian, but I'm half Indonesian, so I consider myself Asian and Australia. I was born in Indonesia, and then I started my career in Sydney, and I worked at Woods Bagot as an interior architect. And then I ended up traveling for about 10 years, living in New York and Hong Kong as a designer. And again, like JJ, I thought I would, be a superstar designer in New York. And I went down that path, and I realized, hang on, I don't know if this is for me. And so I actually ended up moving to Asia and starting my own furniture business called Reddie Furniture. And we produce all of our products out of Asia. And yeah, so we've been doing that for the last 5 years, and I've roped my husband and our entire family into this beautiful mess that is running your own business as a family. And so yeah, it's been really great being able to kind of work, kind of internationally and produce in Asia.
Hi everyone, my name's John Liow. I'm an Australian-born Chinese, probably one of the few Asians here that don't speak Mandarin or anything other than English, actually, which is a bit embarrassing. So I did what all good Asian kids do, and I did economics after school. Failed miserably at that, so I decided to pursue my love of design and creativity and went into industrial design. So I did my industrial design degree. Worked as an industrial designer for a couple of years in consumer products, furniture, lighting, but had this desire, I guess, to grow into the more spatial side of design. It was that point in time that I started a business with my business partner Sam over there, and I was probably one of the few designers that didn't have an architectural qualification at the time that was designing architectural spaces under Sam's license, which was he gave me the license to, I guess, delve into that space. Since then, finished my architectural qualifications, and as a company, we do everything from furniture, lighting, consumer products, placemaking, a lot of hospitality residential projects as well. So we cover a breadth of things. Yeah.
Awesome. I feel like just you talking about your experience as a Chinese kid and having to do engineering is actually not a unique scenario. I kind of feel like, I mean, I'm sure you're very special, but it's a story that I hear quite regularly as an editor. Meeting creative people around the region. It was something that really struck me, having grown up in Australia, that I was kind of given an opportunity to do whatever I wanted to do. It wasn't even a conversation. And it was something that really struck me as I started to meet creatives around the region. It differs obviously from country to country. Asia is not one just big landmass that is all the same. It is very culturally different. And different in many other ways. But yeah, your situation was something that really struck me, and it was a story that I was kind of hearing over and over again.
I have to preface that by saying my parents are actually here today. That wasn't forced upon me.
They're very supportive now, so that's good.
In fact, I think when I was doing economics, my parents were going, "What are you doing? You're not good at maths,"
So very atypical Chinese parents. But no, I think, from my perspective, it was just a story that I was hearing quite often. And I think that it was almost a bit of a battle, clearly not with you and your parents, but just this sort of need to prove that being creative and in that industry was a kind of a worthy career path. So it was something that, I think was motivation for me to, even more want to put a spotlight on Asia. So, which is what we're going to talk about. And I think maybe we should start with talking about the opportunities that are in the region. I had a conversation with a couple of Aussie designers in Milan this year, and one of them was Tom Faraday. I don't know if he's here. He's been wandering around the show the last couple of days, but he just did a collaboration with a company called Stellar Works, who are becoming internationally well known, but they very proudly make everything in China. And I thought it was really interesting to hear from a young Aussie designer who has actually had education and opportunities in Europe, to be looking at Asia as a place to work that is just as viable and just as interesting and dynamic, and that it's not just this sort of end goal to get to, somewhere else on the other end of the earth that for some reason Australia seems to associate itself with still. Yeah. So maybe JJ, because you've, you are working regionally, you've got quite a unique experience. And I know obviously you don't have the same level of experience in Australia, but do you want to talk about just, I guess, the last couple of years since you've started your practice and the opportunities that you've had just from putting yourself out there?
I think working in Asia is the only thing I know, but everything is so close together, and there's so much development happening and ideas running and investment going into Hong Kong and Manila is even though I never thought about working in the Philippines at all, and suddenly all of these investors are in the Philippines wanting to do stuff because there's a lot of money and there's a lot of the market is well traveled. My market, I mostly cater to like millennial clients, clients in their 30s and 40s, and all of these people are the next generation of leaders. A lot of them are developers' kids. They have the ingenuity, the entrepreneurship. They have the dreams in creating like businesses and lifestyle spaces and leisure spaces and homes for themselves and their kids. And they're looking for designers to collaborate with, especially those with a kind of a global viewpoint, a regional perspective. They're looking for new ideas, and I just lucked out. I was just there at the right time in my career and collaborating with all these different people. And for example, my first project of my studio is called Elephant Grounds. I collaborated with a sneaker guy called Kevin Poon, who has a fashion brand in Hong Kong. And then now this little cafe in Hong Kong, we're building it in Manila. They're building it in Beijing, they're building it in Dubai, and we helped create the brand DNA from the start. And the quality and the execution, the construction and the branding is just so well done. And now we're seeing investors who are willing to license the brand, license the idea, and the idea is a Hong Kong made brand. And these are the kind of, and I'm helped by doing restaurants and cafes. I don't know if you guys have can add to this, but the ideas are born out of collaborations with clients who are just well traveled and who are seeing the world, and they want to bring that back to Asia with them, and they just want to work with global minded designers who are willing to take their concepts and maybe export it out of Asia as well.
But I think that's a really good point you bring, that you can execute really, really good work in Asia, because I get this all the time, having a brand which I proudly say is made in Indonesia, where there are a lot of people out there that will roll their eyes at that and go, oh, it's not as good as Western made, but that's pretty much saying that only lawyers are good in one country. So the talent out of Asia is incredible, and when I was put in a position to, when I first launched my brand, to recommend not to say you're made in Asia, I said to not say I'm made in Asia is doing a disservice to every single person that's making my product. And they are exceptionally talented, and that's what, I want to continue, like JJ, to shine a light on how talented some of these people are. And I think it's a legacy perception of I don't know, everyone has in their head, oh, you know, it's from that country or it can't be good, you know, which is, I just think it's very antiquated.
But what I like about what's going on with you is that we have actually studied abroad. We have worked abroad, so we know good business practice, and we know how to put things together. And the fact that you were able to see the craftsmanship in Indonesia and work with the locals to bring it to a level that's global is amazing, and that's what I do for my projects as well. The craftsmanship is there, the people are there, they just want to collaborate with
and also the technology is there now. They're just really just miles ahead, you know. It's I think it's something that more and more people in Australia should be taking advantage of and seeing the talent there.
Yeah, I mean, we were in Jakarta a few months ago working with a furniture company, and the level of craftsmanship that we saw there, the engineering feats, the mechanisms they were playing with is stuff that I haven't seen here yet.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a myth that, you know, in Asia you can't access the quality or you know, things aren't as good. In fact, I think the pace they work at, the technology that they access enables them to actually maybe trial and error a lot faster than we can over here.
But the thing is, it doesn't need to be here. You could go there and collaborate and do something interesting with people from different cultures and with different technologies.
Yeah, correct.
Well, hopefully we can encourage more people in Australia to do that for sure. I think you touched on a couple of really interesting points though, JJ, without being crass. I mean, obviously, clearly, Asia as a region is the most populous in the world. It is very fast-paced. There is a lot of money there, without sounding crass. But as you said also, I think perhaps what is not understood is that the population is exceptionally well-travelled. And I think we also forget in Melbourne that one of our biggest exports is actually education. And I studied at RMIT, and I meet alumni all around the region, from Seoul to Thailand to Jakarta to somewhere in Indonesia, you know, all sorts of places. So I think we kind of forget actually the number of people that come to Australia and learn here and are educated and then go and take that home. They're also taking our coffee, so I can I can certainly vouch for the coffee in Jakarta. Thanks, Melbourne. I wanted to maybe ask you guys if you had any tips or advice, maybe. Caroline, for you sort of are bridging the two sides from being in Australia and being Aussie and working. You've worked as a designer in Asia, but now also with the manufacturing. Obviously, there are a lot of myths and misconceptions about the quality coming out of the region, but do you have any tips or advice maybe for anyone wanting to kind of go across and start working there, or even collaborating and manufacturing?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to lie, it's not like, obviously when you're dealing with someone that speaks English and in your own culture, it's a lot easier. But I had a concept of doing a customizable furniture business, and there were no big factories that wanted to work with me, so I literally just went to Central Java, and what I discovered was that there was this entire town, like the size of half of Melbourne, that just manufacture. Like every single person in every house makes furniture. And so there are these I think in Vietnam has this, China has this, and so sometimes you just have to go there. You know, you can try to look up on the internet and all of that, but you really, I felt a benefit of just going there and talking to people, and it's really just a gut feel. Like I interviewed about 10 different factories. There were really slick guys, and there were some, you know, a lot of Western factory owners over there, and I ended up going with 4 guys on the side of a dirt road, and I was like, you know what, let's do this together. And together we've, you know, built and grown, and now we actually own our own factory in Indonesia. And so sometimes it's just like, you just don't have to follow any textbook, you just really have to go on your own intuition. It is a hard thing to do, like probably in terms of communication and all of that, but if you, I speak the language in Indonesia, so that did help me, but there's a lot of foreign factory owners there as well. There's a lot of Europeans and Americans, not as many Australians, which I'm always so surprised about because it's right on our doorstep.
Well, I think, I'm going to speak for myself, not the rest of the country, but I was probably one of the only kids that didn't go to Bali on holiday when I was a kid. You know, I think a lot of Australians, that's kind of all we know of Indonesia. And it is a beautiful island to holiday on, but there is nevertheless a big country and a lot of other people And I had actually been to the Philippines first, and it was really Manila that was kind of, it stole my heart. The people there stole my heart. And
the craftsmanship and the goods and the design.
Yeah, absolutely. And the food and all of those other wonderful things. But when I speak to Australians and other foreigners, Westerners, about the fact that I like Manila, they think I'm slightly mad. And I think I kind of experienced the same kind of pleasant shock when I went to Jakarta for the first time, because I think, again, a lot of people would just imagine this horrible backwater, but it's actually a really dynamic city. Amazing F&B scene. There's really great bars and restaurants and coffee, and there's cute little boutiques and great little hotels opening up. And aside from the traffic, it's a really great place to be. And I think maybe there is sort of this vision of not just Jakarta and Indonesia, but maybe other cities around Asia, because in Australia we don't necessarily hear about them other than very sensationalised news, that these visions that we have in our head of what these places are is not at all true.
Oh, absolutely. And also I find once you actually are there and you spend time there, you realise that you're all just people at the end of the day, and you can find ways of communicating and actually getting projects done. And I think a benefit of also manufacturing in somewhere other than your own kind of region is that you learn different skills. So in our collection now, we have a lot of Rattan and a lot of kind of craftsmanship that I had only learnt through these guys.
Yeah, I think it's a good point that the idea that tapping into Asia isn't just to access cheap production or fast production. It's about tapping into the layers of cultural heritage that are there as well. So you discover new materials, new processes. So I think one of the things we learnt working with manufacturers overseas is to not see them as, oh, they're just the hands and feet of my creative genius. It's really a collaboration to go there and go, hey, these guys can actually, together we can partner and create some incredible stuff that I couldn't do just sitting here in my office. So it's really collaborating with them. Yeah.
There's a very go-getter attitude among these manufacturers in Asia. There's not a lot of red tape to get anything done. I think everybody is generally enthusiastic, and there's Reddie there, but the slides of my projects, every project that I work with, because I'm more of an interior designer, I collaborate with artists and artisans and craftsmen to create bespoke things, and I think our clients always want something unique and different. And if it's a good price point, then that's a plus. And there's all these craftsmen in Asia that I work with, paper makers, rattan makers, that their work is still kind of new in terms of the global stage. So it gives a sense of unique identity to the projects, and the clients are always appreciate it, and the quality is really amazing.
Yeah, actually that's something that I wanted to go back to, that John first brought up. I think there is this sort of initial assumption that anything that's made anywhere in Asia is of lesser quality, and that it is just a price point sort of decision. I think it's very easy to forget that a number of countries in Asia have crafts and skill and heritage that dates back longer than Australia had white people in it. And, we also forget that actually the West was copying China before it was the other way round. There are materials and skills like silk and porcelain and lacquerware that was invented in China, and the West stole that technology and took it back. So it was the other way round first. Yeah. So I think it is really important to talk about these things because, Stellar Works is just one example. Your factory in Indonesia is another example. Yeah, sure, there's, some places that will churn out stuff really cheaply and maybe not care about quality, but I think that happens everywhere in the world. And maybe it takes a bit of work to search them out. But there, as you said, I think also creative partners that are willing to work with you rather than just manufacturing. And did you want to elaborate a little bit more on that, John, even?
I think the global push for transparency and ethical production is helping to push factories into a higher standard. Certainly in the past, I've been to factories where I've seen kids operating table saws and lathes, but I think that is something that's, it's always been frowned upon, but I think that's being weeded out. In one of our latest projects, we designed a luggage range for a brand called July, and And the level of quality there, we went through a few factories, we tested out with some factories, move on to other ones, but you find factories that are willing to match your standard and understand that they need to raise their game. They need to be ethical. They need to be transparent. They need to produce high quality. They need to use the latest technology. And so I think the misconception is true to some points, but if you really search them out, they exist. Yeah.
It's definitely not a sweatshop. Like everyone has this idea that Asia equals sweatshop, which it doesn't, because I know my factory, everyone finishes at 4, they go to the beach, we have aerobics on Fridays and...
Come work for you then.
Yeah. And I'm like, hey, you guys have a pretty good life here.
I bet they eat well as well.
Yeah, so then that's something I also want to shine a light on more, that, they're everyone's having a good time, and it's not like, I don't know where that factory is that gave it such a bad reputation, but I haven't seen it, so...
But I think in order to make any project, really, you have, of course, three parts. You have the craftsman, you have the designer, and you have the market or client, right? And I think that it's the role of the designer to bridge the craftsman to the client, and to make sure to elevate. Like they need our help to collaborate with them to elevate the art and to bring it out to the market. Don't you guys think?
Yeah, absolutely.
I was going to say, it's probably us as consumers that facilitate the $5 light that isn't of the highest quality, because we're willing to buy that kind of stuff. I mean, we worked on a lighting range, which you'll see shortly, but I don't know how many prototypes we went through, but it was about the factory could do the job and they had the technology to do it, but we had to push them. And as consumers or receivers of that product, we had to let them know that, hey, we believe in you, you can do it, but let's get to that level together. So as consumers, if we're willing to buy crap off the shelf, then we're really facilitating that endless cycle of cheap goods and cheap production.
I mean, they need the designer. They need the design minds, and if you guys are open to working with Asian craftsmen, I mean, you guys could make amazing, beautiful things.
I think that's a really good point, JJ. And I think also what I've found in, I guess, the 5 years since I started the magazine is that, as I said, there's a lot of designers that will study in Melbourne and they go home and they have access to this craft and this technology. Something like Rattan is native to Indonesia. That is, I think, aside from the Philippines, the only place in the world where this material can be found. And it's kind of interesting, actually, if you look at the history of that particular material. It was always only exported to Italy. Italy was, if you look at really old rattan furniture, it was almost always made in Italy, but the raw material always from Indonesia. And I think as the country has developed, for those of you that don't know, the recently re-elected president actually came from the furniture industry.
Yeah, he was a furniture maker.
And so I think it's interesting to see how the factories are developing, the production, but also design. And there are a handful of really, really talented young designers in Jakarta, but also throughout the country. And so, that's changing. But I think Australians should also be really open to kind of looking at that.
What was really funny is recently when I went back on a factory trip, I'm seeing more and more kind of Danish-looking blonde, like 21-year-olds around the town. I was like, what is going on here? And a lot of Danes have started doing internships in woodworker, like just these, woodworking shops. Like, we want to learn how it was, how it was originated. I was like, I like this. It's like kind of, in reverse now. It's great.
Well, as an interior designer, I've seen a huge trend in natural materials and eco materials and raw materials as terms of a finish, and all of these things come from Asia. So it's really great for our fabricators and our markets too.
Okay, so I feel like the next thing that I want to touch on is a little bit of a deviation, is maybe talking about diversity in design in Australia. I feel like obviously Australia is a very multicultural country now. It's taken us a little while to get there, and we were talking a little bit about this last night, JJ, over dinner, that particularly in Melbourne, we embrace diversity and our sort of ethnic plurality through our food. Melbourne wouldn't be the city that it is without the food that we have. It's one of the things that I really enjoy when I come back, but it's less visible in the design community. And I don't know if you two want to maybe, obviously JJ's less qualified to talk about diversity, but John, do you want to have a word about that?
Yeah, it's the way I see Australia, it's almost becoming synonymous with Asian culture. So, I mean, so many Australians have been to Asian cities and are familiar with Asian cuisine and food. So we have this really unique depth of consumers in Australia, so much so that you can, one of our projects, it was a Malaysian restaurant, and the concept was based around the ingredients involved in sambal chili. But when you talk to an Australian or local about that material and about that food, they get it. It's not foreign to them. So I think what's interesting is that we're able to tap into cultural narratives or stories that might be based in Asian cities, but the locals actually identify with that, whilst at the same time the true Asians from those cities also find it nostalgic. So you're able to tap into a broad depth of customers in that way. Yeah.
Do you want to add to that, Caroline?
Yeah, I feel like as I guess with the internet and everything, I feel like Australians are becoming more aware of what is around them, and I have seen, I was, like I said, when I was first launched and everyone would say, don't say it's made in Asia, I was pleasantly surprised about how many more people are interested and want to know the story and want to know where something is actually made, and which is a really nice thing to see.
So I think maybe before we kind of wrap up and throw it out to you guys for questions, I thought I'd ask you all to maybe explain in your own words what it means to you to be an Asian designer, and whether that's even a label that you're comfortable with. JJ's shaking his head. Go for it.
When I was invited to this talk, I was like, design in Asia, okay. It's the only thing I know. Like, I've only been designing in Asia. So, and then yesterday you're like, yay, Asian designer. I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, but yeah, I guess I'm Asian and I work in Asia, and all my fabricators, contractors, clients are Asian. And we're doing really amazing things, and it would be great if, I guess, some of this knowledge and expertise could be shared with, I guess, the rest of the world, or our neighbors here in Australia as well. It would be great to, I would love to have more broad exchange of conversation, because you guys have the skill set and the talent and know-how that we would love in Asia as well. I think that if there was one thing that I really would love to see more of in the next 10 years is Australian designers working in Asia, in Hong Kong and whatnot, and us being able to do collaborative work here in Melbourne and Sydney, and being able to close the gap between the skill sets and the knowledge base, and therefore it's not about Asian and non-Asian design, it's just a whole regional talent pool with a same set of leadership and skill set and experience, just building stuff together.
I love being an Asian designer. Mainly, I love having a factory in Asia that I can go there every month, so being able to kind of design here and sell to the Australian and international market. I love being able to kind of, I know sometimes when you go to Asia, it's just, I feel like it's a little bit more calm, and the factory town I'm in, it's in a little village, and so it's always nice to kind of tap into that lifestyle and something completely different. And I think that creatively, that really, really helps. And it's just awesome.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Asian design, or being an Asian designer, is probably to do with being able to empathize with Asian traditions or culture. For example, we did an office project where, for the client, the most important thing was having their reception and their brand right up front at the entry. Whereas in European design, in hotels in Europe, you see them doing the opposite. They're putting receptions tucked away at the back and removing that threshold or that border. And so as a designer working with Asian clientele, it's almost being able to empathize with, okay, I understand it's to do with showing face or whether it's feng shui and just being empathetic to that sort of cultural heritage. So I think that's what differentiates maybe between operating in this region and other regions. But I think as a good designer, you should try to, I guess, understand the culture of every client. So it's I think that's part of the journey.
Nice. Okay. Do we have any questions from the audience?
There's a microphone.
Hi, my name's Chi Dang. I'm also an Asian designer.
No, really?
I think the perception, is it true that Asian manufacturers seem to be more willing, like we're talking about all the problems you have with fabrication, but I think that's the same around the world, isn't it? Like, I find fabricating in Australia really difficult.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
it's-
no, and also
Yeah.
I think the skill set is less and less here because
Yeah,
manufacturing
yeah.
has been moved to Asia.
Yeah.
And like I know when I build anything and I'll have a sketch and they'll have it done by lunchtime, whereas
Yes.
I'm sure in Australia you can't get that done. They're like, oh, we'll schedule it in a bit later, and
Yeah.
definitely the talent is there.
And just when I say I'm an Asian designer, people say, you're an Asian designer, but I always see myself as like an Australian designer. Like if someone asks me, I always say I'm an Australian. But it's just weird when people see you as an Asian designer. Like, I guess I am. But when they look at my designs, they go, I can see the Asian influence. And I'm like, I guess. And I guess it's in me somewhere.
No.
But I studied in Europe, and all my life I've been in Australia. So
Yeah.
so I've got the Asian name, and but at the end of the day, we're all people.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm sure you can empathise. If you're slightly Asian or from somewhere else in Australia, everyone will always be, but where are you really from?
Yes,
And I always say Sydney. They don't know what to say after that.
It's definitely a generalisation, and I think it's up to us as a society to just push past that and just be designers.
Yeah, exactly.
If it's any comfort to you, I get the same in reverse in Hong Kong. I'm clearly not a Hong Konger. Do we have any other questions?
To quickly talk to that point, I think part of the reason why I wanted to have this panel in the first place is because I've been in the design media for 5-6 years, and I feel that and I started to feel in the publications that I was at that I was actually often the only person of colour in the room, and it sort of almost stopped me in my tracks how late it took me to realise that in my career. And I think that, to your point, that, I'm looking outside of my own body. I'm not seeing myself being an Asian person moving in these spaces. But I think there's real value in acknowledging that and being able to discuss that, and for people to have an appreciation of that and what that might mean. Because I think that there's so much service being done towards the European regions and a kind of reverence that maybe we don't get going out that direction. So I think that's for me why this panel was so important. Anyway, but continue with the questions if anyone has. I'm sure we do. Yep.
Cool, thank you. So I distribute to Chinese brands into Australia, and just over the last 3 days I had a lot of questions on the stand, and the main one would be, so where is it made? And I'd proudly say, this is made in China, and these are actually Chinese brands. Sometimes I get sort of a funny look, and and then I try to explain that with one of our brands, we work with designers all over the world. We've got Spanish designers, we've got Italian designers, and we've got a lot of emerging Chinese designers that we embrace into the brand as well. So one of the things that our CEO wanted to encourage was for me to come and find an Australian designer to collaborate with our brand and design for the Australian market as well as the Chinese market for for our label, and I actually had a good talk with the organisers of Denfair, and we sat down and talked about who we thought were good suggestions for that. And we did reach out to a few of those designers, and pretty much, we got a bit of a shrug. And to me, I think being raised in Australia, and I'm very proud of Australian design. I think Australian design is amazing and quite unique in the world. And I'd really love to send kind of like a message to China, where it's such a big marketplace, and Australian design can really prosper in that marketplace. And at the moment, there's shows like Design Shanghai, Beijing Design Week that really embrace original design, and the market is changing there as well. They've got design students graduating in massive numbers compared to 20 years ago, you know. So these people want to see good product. And at the moment in China, there's a lot of great design with big brand houses coming from Europe that are quite unaffordable to most of the market. And I find that Australian design would be something that is a really unique option for the Chinese market. And there really isn't that much there. So why do you think that is the case? I mean, what is it, the misperception or the concern that Australian designers have? And I think you guys might be able to answer that better, being Asian and Australian designers, except for JJ, sorry, to explain that.
I think a lot of Australian designers kind of just think of the Australia as the main market. I don't know, because it is such a great design market, and maybe that's big enough. And then we just, for some reason, we have this maybe through education when we go to uni and all that kind of stuff. And then the next place you go, like you said, is Europe, and then America. But right now, like, Asia is where it's at. That's where the consumer is. And I spent some time living in Hong Kong, and I've seen it. Like, our products are in Lane Crawford, and that clientele is just so well educated. And I think it's just about more of this to happen, and more people educating new up-and-coming Aussie designers that you want to sell in Asia, you want to distribute in Asia. Like, this is where your market is now, and you kind of are a little bit dumb if you don't want to do that, you know?
Hearing about like the shrug after you invite them to collaborate with you is kind of unfortunate, because the market in Asia is huge. I mean, it's just really ridiculous. My business has grown in the 4 or 5 years since I've established it. But I also want to say that I walked the whole fair yesterday because I have a few projects currently that need sourcing. And I'm like, oh, Australia and New Zealand are right here. And I would love to source lights and furniture and stuff for my Hong Kong clients. And then I would like approach each of the booths, like brands I've never heard about, because they only market to Australia.
Yeah.
And they're like, where are you from? I'm like, oh, I'm from Hong Kong. I have a restaurant and a residential. I need to be outfitted, and I would love to work with your chairs. And then they just look at me like, oh, yeah, I think we ship to Hong Kong. Like, I'm like, you should be shipping to Hong Kong.
I know.
And then,
it's like 3 months.
right?
Shipping,
like, there's, I'll tell you about 2 booths. One booth, it's a lighting supplier from New Zealand, and I basically like WhatsApp the whole booth to my client, and she was like, it's a residential. She's like, just take everything, just buy everything, and so I told the New Zealand lighting person, I was like, we want like 3 of these, 2 of these, 1 of this, 1 of that, and then she was like, okay, we have to wait till September, I guess, because we're not really ready for, so, and then there's another one where it's like a Rattan cane manufacturer. All the design is from Australia, but the Rattan is from Indonesia, the wood is from America, some assembly is in Thailand, but they only sell to the Australian market, which like blows my mind.
Yeah,
I'm like,
no,
I would
crazy.
love for this stuff in my projects in Hong Kong. So what I don't get is the kind of separation of us as a market in Hong Kong, designers in Hong Kong, my clients in Hong Kong, and why the Australian fabricators and furniture designers and stuff don't really care about selling to the Asian market. I mean, it's really a lost opportunity for collaboration and and selling to my market there.
Yeah, I mean, to your point about how do you overcome that, it's made in China, I think, again, it can't be, this was designed in Australia and sent to China to be made. When that happens, I think when you approach that kind of mindset, you do get products that aren't great. There has to be that connection. You have to, as a designer, we have to design here, go there and oversee the production, do quality checks, and you get great product out of that. So I think if that can be broken down and said, it's not just designed here and sent over there, but it's a collaboration between the two countries to come up with a great product. I often find that can overcome that stigma, I guess, that you talk about.
Yeah, if I can add to that with my very limited experience, would be maybe to invite them to the factory. Yeah, they might be quite shocked. Any other questions? Yes, good.
Hi, I'm Grace. I'm part of a Filipino cultural and food advocacy group called Entrepreneurs, and we resonate really well with what JJ's talking about as well as the rest of the panellists. One of the things I wanted to ask, it's becoming a big trend here in Melbourne, being the restaurant scene, being outfitted to be at the most Instagrammable, but without any notion to the food and the storytelling behind it. How do you, as designers in Asia, which is very Instagrammable sort of population, reconcile that creative power that you have with the fact that there's obviously a lot of drive to make everything look so pretty without the notion of connecting it back to the food, which is what the restaurant scene is all about?
First of all, you have to pick the right designer, because a lot of the clients, they just see, that's me. Just kidding. Not really. A lot of my clients have put on the brief Instagrammable, and I have to say, even though we criticize it, the most users in the world for Instagram are the Filipinos, the Thais, and Indonesians. They're all in Asia. Okay, so we're following that brief. It is the role of the designer to push back the client and state, look, what are we really making here? If you just do a space for one Instagram moment, unless the food is good and the service is good and operation is good, and the story is good and the ingredients are amazing, those people will only go one time for the photo and they'll never come back again. And my job is to create spaces that are not obvious, but the feeling is good. You may not remember what it looks like, but atmospherically, it should be something that you could come back to again and again and again, and it should really frame service, food, product. But some clients need to just be led that path by the right designer.
I think it's an interesting point. People these days, good or bad, are searching for experiences. It's one thing to have great food, but unfortunately, and I'm not saying this is fair on you, but unfortunately, sometimes restaurants need to do more than that. We heard from one of our clients recently how the mid-tier level of dining in America is dying because if it's not worth your time to get off your couch, you can order food and have that same experience in your lounge room. So the spaces or restaurants do play a part in going, hey, we serve great authentic food, but here's an experience, a multi-sensory experience that also adds to that. So I think it's true. It's unfortunate that we're down to Instagrammable, is it photogenic, but at the same time, technology and our culture is advancing at the pace that we actually do have to acknowledge that we need to design that experience as well.
Any more questions?
Any hands up?
I would like to add, like, your question, now that I have time to think about it, what it means to be an Asian designer. I think in the beginning the issue is about ethnicity, but actually it's really not these days, with a lot of people coming to school in Australia for design, or a lot of Australians hopefully working abroad. I know a few, definitely. Some of them are sitting here right now who have worked abroad in Asia and whatnot. And Suzy, I would say, is an Asian designer as well. I mean, she's pro Asian designers for Design Anthology magazine and everything. and she's not ethnically Asian. I think the whole concept of Asian designer is similar to European designer or to American designer. It's someone who takes advantage of the region's resources, customer base, and client base in a flexible and open manner that makes you an Asian designer, where you really take advantage of the whole region as your platform in order to create something. Right?
Well
right?
said. Well said.
Well said.
Right? So whether you're white, black,
Yeah,
or
doesn't
Asian,
matter.
it's you. If you're an Asian designer, if you're operating in every part of the region that's available to you.
Yeah.
Well said. Do we have more questions?
No?
No? Okay, well, thank you all so much for coming down and joining us this afternoon. Can we please give each of our speakers a very warm round of applause and a welcome again to Melbourne, to JJ. Thank you all.
Please have me back.
Thanks so much, guys, and
Thanks
thanks
so
to
much.
Suzy
Thank you.
as well.